Breaking. A body double was shot today in Ouagadougou. The real Ibrahim Traoré is missing. At exactly 6:42 a.m., chaos erupted in the capital of Burkina Faso. A presidential convoy heading west on the Boulevard Charles de Gaulle was ambushed by unknown gunmen. Automatic rifle fire ripped through the morning air, and smoke quickly engulfed the lead vehicle. Moments later, the state broadcaster announced the unthinkable. President Ibrahim Traoré had been killed in a targeted assassination. By 7:15 a.m., every major African and international outlet echoed the same headline. Some mourned, others celebrated. But by 10:30 a.m., the story began to fracture. The corpse retrieved from the convoy, dressed in Traoré's signature military fatigues, was missing two key features: a bullet scar on the upper right shoulder and a distinctive burn mark on the left wrist. Intelligence officers reviewing internal security footage grew pale. The man killed in the attack was not Traoré. It was a body double. Across Ouagadougou, whispers turned to shouts. If the real president wasn't dead, then where was he? Inside the heavily fortified Kuluba bunker, Minister of Defense Colonel Suleiman Zida slammed his fist on the table. "Where is he?" he barked. No one in the room answered. They'd seen the CCTV footage just as he had. Traoré had never entered that convoy. Instead, the man dressed as him had walked out of the villa alone, flanked by decoy vehicles, while Traoré vanished through an unmarked underground corridor. Someone had tipped him off. By midday, confusion gripped the city. The national television station played old interviews and patriotic songs. Armed soldiers patrolled the streets, but none wore presidential insignia. France issued a statement expressing concern and readiness to assist in stability operations. That word, stability, sent a chill down spines across West Africa. In Ghana, protests erupted outside the French embassy. In Mali, young men gathered in front of the Russian liaison building in Bamako, waving Burkinabe flags and chanting, "Traoré lives." But in Ouagadougou, silence. The turning point came at 1:37 p.m., when a video message dropped on a Pan-African telegram channel. The video was grainy, the lighting dim, but the voice was unmistakable. "I am alive," said Ibrahim Traoré, "and I know who tried to kill me." The message spread like wildfire. In it, Traoré accused a foreign-backed faction of the Burkina Faso armed forces of plotting his assassination, with logistical support from agents of imperialist regimes. He did not name countries, but the implication was clear. He called on loyal commanders and the people of Burkina Faso to hold your ground and wait for my return. And then the feed cut off. By 2:15 p.m., the city was in a state of paralysis. Banks closed. Shops locked their doors. The National Guard, unsure who to obey, withdrew from key checkpoints. Airspace was shut down. Internet access slowed and then blinked out entirely for most citizens. Colonel Zida and the emergency cabinet met again, this time with fewer voices at the table. Several generals had mysteriously gone silent. Two had fled the country by private jet the night before. One was found shot in the head in his home in Sector 22. By 4 p.m., a second message surfaced. This time, it was not from Traoré. In a military barracks north of the capital, a man stepped in front of the camera. Lieutenant General Abdul Razak Traoré, no relation, declared that, in light of the president's death, he would assume interim control of the state to prevent civil collapse. But the lie didn't hold. Within an hour, photos emerged online of the real Traoré, alive and well, apparently taken in a remote location, seated beside what looked like Russian Wagner operatives and Malian special forces. No one could confirm the location, but experts noted the terrain resembled the tri-border Sahel zone. At 6:07 p.m., gunfire erupted in Ouagadougou's military district. A firefight broke out between two rival units, one aligned with General Abdul Razak, the other reportedly loyal to the exiled president. The battle lasted nearly 45 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 17 soldiers were dead, and Abdul Razak had vanished. Then, just as dusk fell across the capital, a third broadcast appeared, this time through an encrypted live stream that cut across all national TV signals. The real Ibrahim Traoré appeared again, standing beside a weathered map and flanked by masked commandos. "My people," he began, his voice unwavering. "Today, they tried to erase your voice by killing your symbol. But I was never the symbol. You are, and we are not done yet." He paused, eyes sharp. "The traitors inside our house will be named. Arrests have begun. But let this be clear. This was not a coup. This was a foreign operation disguised as one, and they failed." Within minutes, spontaneous cheers erupted in the neighborhood surrounding Ouaga 2000. Thousands poured into the streets, banging pots, waving flags, shouting his name. Soldiers previously loyal to the rogue faction laid down arms and joined the crowd. Cell towers flickered back to life. Images of Traoré's speech flooded WhatsApp groups, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. By nightfall, Ibrahim Traoré had become more than a president. He was now a symbol of survival, of resistance, of something Africa had not seen in decades, a leader who refused to die, even when his own army tried to replace him. But not everyone celebrated. Inside a windowless room in Abidjan, a man in a sharp suit watched Traoré's speech with a frown. He tapped his phone, then stood up and walked to a secure line. "It didn't work," he said into the receiver. "He's still alive. Yes, the body double. Shot on schedule. The convoy was hit exactly where we planned." He listened. "No, the Russians found him before we could extract. We believe Mali moved him across the border." Another pause. "No, sir. The backup plan is still in motion. Operation Lafayette has not failed yet." He hung up, then turned to a glass board with a name circled in red. Colonel Amadou Kéré, the man next in line to be offered a seat, or a bullet. By the early hours of the next morning, the city was gripped by a calm so unnatural it felt staged. The streets of Ouagadougou were unusually quiet. No honking taxis, no schoolchildren, no shouting vendors. Soldiers patrolled intersections, but their eyes were distant, distracted, scanning rooftops and windows instead of civilians. Those loyal to Traoré had gone underground. Those who weren't had started choosing sides very carefully. In the outskirts near Zignare, a convoy of blacked-out pickup trucks pulled into a secured compound surrounded by red earth and baobab trees. Inside, Ibrahim Traoré stood over a wooden table covered in field maps, military radio schematics, and satellite printouts. Beside him, Commandant Diallo of the Malian Special Operations quietly relayed intercepted communications from inside the Burkina Faso General Staff. "They're arguing over who gets to make the next announcement," Diallo said. Traoré didn't respond right away. He was staring at the list of names he'd received from an anonymous source 3 nights earlier. 15 names, all high-ranking officers, all involved in a plan codenamed Silver Fang. "They thought I wouldn't see it coming," Traoré murmured, "but one of them couldn't live with it." He folded the paper and slid it into the fire, burning nearby. "Get me Kéré, now." Colonel Amadou Kéré, head of the country's cyber intelligence division, had been unreachable since the previous night. He was known to be fiercely loyal to Traoré, but his silence was starting to worry the inner circle. At 4:23 a.m., Traoré was located, not in the capital, but in the southern province of Comoé. A drone had picked up a heat signature at an abandoned UN listening post. Within 30 minutes, a unit of Malian and Burkina Faso loyalists was dispatched. They found him unconscious, bound, and gagged, a belt of C4 strapped to his chest and a remote signal jammer buried 30 meters away. He'd been left to die, slowly. When they brought Traoré back to the compound, he was dehydrated, bruised, but alive, and he had names. General Razak didn't act alone, Traoré rasped. This goes up higher. There's an external handler, someone offshore, European accent. French? Traoré asked. No, Traoré replied. Worse. Belgian. The compound fell silent. The plot wasn't just internal. Foreign operatives had embedded themselves into the highest ranks of the Burkina Faso military, coordinating from offshore safe houses across Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal. But what chilled everyone in the room was Traoré's final revelation. They're planning another strike, this time with drones. By 6 a.m., anti-air batteries near the capital were reactivated. Mobile radar units were moved across key government zones. Traoré gave the order to evacuate all remaining loyal civilian ministers and their families to hidden shelters. And then he gave another order. Prepare the decoys. 3 additional body doubles, trained, dressed, and briefed, were sent to different locations across the country. One boarded a convoy heading north toward the Sahel. Another slipped into an embassy function. The third entered a hospital wing, posing as a wounded officer. We let them guess, Traoré said, and while they're chasing ghosts, we clean house. While decoys played their part across the nation, Ibrahim Traoré and a hand-picked strike team moved toward Ouagadougou under heavy disguise. Not by convoy, not by helicopter, but in a series of battered civilian vehicles, 2 old Peugeot 504s and a rusted Toyota Hilux with a covered rear bed. Each vehicle was driven by trusted villagers from Ouagadougou, all veterans of the resistance days when Traoré had first taken power. They knew every back road, every informal checkpoint, and every face worth avoiding. At 7:41 a.m., they passed a shuttered gas station just outside the capital's northern edge. 2 men leaned against a barrel, smoking. One nodded as they passed. It was a signal. The city was awake. Inside the presidential palace, chaos ruled. A temporary junta, made up of nervous mid-ranking officers, held emergency briefings, unsure whether to denounce Traoré or wait for further instructions. Every phone call they made was recorded. Every video conference was intercepted. The building was crawling with advisors, flown in from a neighboring country overnight, none of whom wore uniforms, but all of whom carried encrypted radios. At exactly 8:12 a.m., 2 drones crossed into Burkina Faso's airspace from the west. They flew low, below radar, skimming the trees at alarming speed. Their target, the hills north of Ziniare, where intelligence falsely indicated Traoré was hiding. But what they struck were dummy installations, covered in thermal blankets and fuel barrels. The explosion lit up the sky. Western media immediately pushed a target-neutralized headline. Inside the palace, some even cheered. By 8:35 a.m., that lie was exposed. Traoré's voice echoed once more across a hijacked telecom frequency. You missed. Across the capital, that single phrase became a battle cry. Civilians who had gone quiet rose up again. Graffiti spread on walls. Protesters waved flags outside military buildings. Loyalist officers launched coordinated strikes at 3 army bases, neutralizing rogue elements with surgical precision. Inside the palace, the junta began to fracture. One officer attempted to flee in a private helicopter, only for it to be grounded by a warning shot from a surface-to-air launcher parked on a nearby rooftop. Another officer tried to delete sensitive files, only to be tackled by his own bodyguard. They knew the end was near. Traore arrived at the palace gates at 9:17 a.m., wearing civilian clothes and flanked by just 6 guards. The outer sentries looked up, startled, but then they recognized him. Not by uniform, not by voice, but by presence. They saluted and opened the gate. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, like a man who already knew he had won. Inside the central chamber, the remaining officers stood silent. One tried to speak. "Mr. President." "Don't," Traore said. He turned to the national broadcaster's live feed, already rolling. "My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am alive. I am present. And I will not be moved by cowards or colonizers." The broadcast cut to scenes of citizens erupting in cheers, vehicles honking, and drummers taking to the streets. Military units that had wavered now snapped to attention. The coup was over, crushed before it could take its full breath. But the reckoning had just begun. Behind closed doors, Traoré summoned a list of names to the intelligence unit. "These men will be arrested by sundown. If they resist—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. In a dimly lit office in Brussels, a man in a navy blue suit listened to the report over secure satellite relay. "So the operation failed," he said. A voice on the other end replied, "For now." "And the asset?" "Still in place. Traoré doesn't suspect him." "Good. Keep it that way." The call ended. The man leaned back, smiling. Operation Lafayette wasn't over. It had just evolved. 2 days passed. The streets of Ouagadougou were now alive with chants and cheers, but the mood in the presidential compound remained icy. The cleanup had begun. Over 24 officers were arrested, their names and faces broadcast live on national television. Half of them had been paraded in cuffs, forced to confess in front of a furious public. A few were still missing, vanished into the shadows, and still Traoré had not smiled. Inside the war room, Colonel Amadou Kéré laid out intercepted correspondence from encrypted military apps used by the coup plotters. One thread, translated into French, included an address in Ouagadougou, a civilian bakery. "Why would they communicate from a bakery?" Kéré asked. "They wouldn't," Traoré said. "Not unless someone inside it wasn't baking bread." At 10:42 p.m. that night, Loyalist commandos stormed the bakery in question. They found no flour, no workers, no ovens. But beneath a false floor panel, they discovered a reinforced data center, complete with satellite uplinks, hard drives, biometric scanners, and classified military comms equipment. It had been an intelligence station, and not a Burkina Faso one. On one of the screens, still logged in, an open chat with a contact labeled simply Lafayette Handler. The commandos took everything. When the footage was shown to Traoré, he didn't speak. He simply stood up and left the room. By morning, the head of Burkina Faso's cyber intelligence unit released a statement. "Foreign interference has been confirmed. Evidence will be presented to regional allies and the African Union." Across the continent, reactions were swift. Protests erupted in Bamako, Niamey, and even in South Africa. Flags burned. Embassies closed their doors. Leaders who had watched from afar now realized that what nearly happened in Burkina Faso could happen anywhere. But as the world focused on the fallout, Traoré focused on something else. In the palace basement, under high security, one of the arrested coup plotters sat alone in a black cell, Major Pascal Zongo. He had once been Traoré's friend, trusted with logistics and counter-espionage. He had also been one of the architects of the assassination attempt. When the door opened, Zongo didn't even look up. Traoré entered alone. "You were with me from the beginning," Traoré said. "When the French left, when we turned to our neighbors, you ate at my table." Zongo didn't flinch. "You sold coordinates. You gave them my schedule. You even selected the double." Still, no response. Then Traoré asked one question. "Who is the handler?" Zongo finally spoke. Just one word. "Kere." Everything stopped. Traoré stared at him. "Amadou Kere?" Zongo nodded slowly. "Then why would he risk his life to save me?" Zongo leaned forward, eyes calm. "Because that's how good they are." Within the hour, Traoré called an emergency meeting. But Kere didn't show. His quarters were empty, his communications dead. His last known location was a military base near Bobo Dioulasso. But no one there had seen him in 24 hours. Traoré paced the war room, gripping the same folder Kere had once brought him. Inside were the names that helped crush the coup. But now he wasn't sure who had authored that list, or why. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, a pre-recorded message aired across Burkina Faso State TV. It featured Kere seated at a desk, wearing the same uniform he'd worn during the rescue. "My name is Colonel Amadou Kere," the message began. "And if you are watching this, it means I have fled, not because I am guilty, but because I know what comes next." He looked into the camera. "They will paint me as a traitor. They will say I was the handler. But I was only one thing, the firewall, between you and what's coming." He paused. "They will come again, stronger, not with bullets, but with votes, loans, satellite deals, peacekeepers, trade contracts. You think you survived the assassination? Number, that was only the rehearsal. The real attack is what comes after, when you lower your guard." The screen went black. That night, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the highest balcony of the palace, looking over the flickering lights of his capital, a city that had nearly buried him, but instead crowned him again. He lit a cigar, exhaled slowly. He had won, but for how long? And somewhere far beyond the continent, in a quiet control room, a man in a Belgian military uniform stared at a new file labeled Phase 2,